Okay, hi. So I'm Tom Cotteram. I'm an associate professor in United States history at the University of Birmingham.
Hi, I'm Emma Manco. I'm a final year history BA student from Italy at the University of Birmingham.
Great. And Emma is my dissertation student. I'm supervising her dissertation. And that's mainly what we're going to talk about. Emma, do you want to start by telling us what is this dissertation about?
Yes, so my dissertation looks at mass migration from Italy to the United States, especially the period that goes from 1880 to circa 1930. And it explores transnational ideas around race, gender, and mobility.
What was it that drew you to this topic? Obviously, you are Italian. You are some sort of migrant yourself. Was there a personal experience that made you interested in this issue?
As you said, the inspiration came partly from personal experience. Yes, my family has a history of migrating from Italy, southern Italy specifically, where I'm from, to Europe and America. And obviously, as an international student here in Birmingham, I am myself an immigrant. But there was also, an more academic aspect to, my inspiration. So here, obviously, at the University of Birmingham, I had the chance to explore the themes of race and gender in more detail. And I specifically developed an interest for the history of East-West and North-South divides in a global context. So yes, it was a combination of the two.
Yeah, so that's one of the central features of your research work, is thinking about the conceptualization of a region and this way that regions become identified with geographical zones, but also there's these kind of binaries that get created between East, West, North, South, these kind of things. Do you want to tell us a bit more about what does the Italian South mean? How was the Italian South invented in this period?
Yeah, yes, actually, my work tries to challenge some of the established ways in which we think of Italian migration and Italian migrants in this period, especially the label Southern Italian, which, we usually use the term Southern Italian pretty neutrally in, everyday speaking. But what I'm trying to explain in this dissertation is that the term Southern Italian was not neutral. There were no, physical, geographical boundaries. It was more of a social political, construct. And I'm arguing in my dissertation that this, Southern Italian as a label and a category of discrimination was constructed in a transnational way. So, both Americans and Italians contributed to creating this label and everything that was associated with it. So Southern Italian was synonym with poor, criminal, illiterate, non-intelligent, and so on.
So it obviously has some similarities to how people think about the American South as well. There's a kind of analogy there between the kind of backward region as the South in both places.
Yes, absolutely. Actually, the historiography on Italian migration has looked at, parallels in terms of the North-South divide between, the United States and Italy. And, the scholarship has produced very interesting works that I've been looking at for my dissertation. And in a way, they've also inspired me.
One of the things that is interesting about your work is that you're doing social history. You're telling us about the real migrants, the people who actually either left southern Italy for the United States for forever or for some limited amount of time, and importantly, the people who stayed behind and how their lives were changed by migration. So you do that social history, but you also do an intellectual history of thinkers and government officials and reformers who are trying to understand what's going on with migration from both American and Italian perspectives. Do you want to tell us about any of those thinkers in particular who have been useful to you or have been important in the project?
Yes, I think one of the most important figures in my dissertation is a person. His name was Adolfo Rossi. His story is quite interesting for my project because he was an immigrant in the United States, but he also worked for the Italian Commissariat of Emigration. So he sought to understand the experience of Italian migrants in the United States firsthand. So he gathered a lot of information on their lifestyles, their everyday struggles, and reported it back to the Italian government. But then he was himself an immigrant. He actually founded the first and now most important Italian-American newspaper. And he promoted, exchange of ideas and also dialogue between Italian and American authorities about, emigration for Italy and immigration in the United States. So when I, came across this figure, I thought, his story could fit pretty well in a dissertation. He is literally, a transnational figure. He knows both sides. He talks a lot about. So Adolfo Rossi is obviously he was a northern, journalist, writer, intellectual, and diplomat from northern Italy, and he talks about the South as well. The problem of southern Italy. He was sent by the Italian government to do an investigation of the rural societies of southern Italy. And this was, quite interesting for me. This, investigation I looked at as a primary source, and it was a way for me to understand how Italian intellectuals in this period thought of, South Italy and what they defined as the problem of emigration. Why are these people migrating, and yeah, so absolutely Adolfo Rossi was an interesting figure for me to look at.
I think one of the possible kind of connections between our work, I don't work on the 19th or the 20th centuries, obviously, I work on the 18th century, but one connection that our work has is that we both deal with these transatlantic figures. So my research is about, at the moment, it's kind of focused on a woman called Angelica Schuyler Church, who was part of a kind of Dutch elite in upstate New York during the American Revolutionary period. She married an Englishman right on the eve of the Revolutionary War and ended up kind of following him to England after the war was over, and lived in London with a few sojourns in Paris, but mostly in London, kind of between the mid-1780s and the mid-1790s. And in that time, she is also grappling with her identity as a migrant, an American. She's part of London high society. She's friends with princes and things like that, but she's also very clear that she's American. And I think her identity as an American grows while she's abroad. And actually, it kind of makes me wonder about, it's completely different social classes we're talking about, but Italian migrants going to the United States, I guess it's a common feature that people start to feel their own national identity more when they're outside of the context of the nation itself. And I wonder if that applies to Italian migrants in the United States. And then I think your work would suggest that there's also a regional element to that Southerners start to feel their Southern identity when they migrate, and then maybe they don't even get along very well with the Northerners who have also migrated up.
Or even between Southerners sometimes.
Right.
So what I'm arguing in my dissertation is essentially that Italians who from the geographical south of Italy who migrated to the United States did not necessarily think of themselves as Southerners. This identity was imposed on them by Italians first and then Americans as well. The thought of themselves as part maybe inhabitants of a village back in Italy, or they had specifically provincial or regional identities. For example, there were Sicilians, Neapolitans, people from Apulia, and so on. So it is true, as you said, though, that they started to develop, more Italian identity in progressively, especially after actually the First and the Second World War in the United States. patriotism became really common amongst, Italian immigrants in America, especially after the World Wars. Yeah. Obviously, the label Southern Italian continued to, affect the lives of these people, and they often, were involved in quarrels or arguments or fights with other Italian immigrants from the north, from northern, regions. Yeah, so it's quite an this regional aspect is something quite interesting to look at, and I think the scholarship has not devoted enough attention to the category, the socio-political construct, and also racial construction of southern Italy.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's actually kind of interesting thinking about the way that your work kind of breaks down the national category and starts to make us think about regions, how regionalism is constructed. And that's obviously totally important to United States history as well. In my period, the post-revolutionary period, the whole idea of an American national identity is invented in this period, and it's not very strong at all. It's really coming from almost nowhere with the revolution itself. Most people still think of themselves primarily as New Yorkers or Virginians or whatever. And obviously, looking at 19th century US history, the Civil War and everything else, regionalism and distinct sectional identities are completely crucial. And then we can look, both you and I, here we are in Birmingham, in the middle of the United Kingdom. We also experienced this kind of regional identity struggle in England. And it's a north-south struggle as well, right? Except the Midlands and Birmingham plays a weird, sits in a weird position in that kind of regional identity. But apart from the fact that here in England, it's the South that is civilized and advanced and so on, and the North that is barbaric and savage, it's not that dissimilar. Kind of makes me wonder if regionalism and regional identity is going to play an important role in thinking about the 21st century future, as kind of post-national future in some way. And that's still an important thing in Italian politics today as well, right?
Absolutely, yes. Discrimination against Southern Italians is still very much alive nowadays in Italian politics. And I think it is also, besides, the north-south divide, there's also the discourse of center versus periphery. So Southern Italy is seen very much as the periphery of the Italian nation, whilst, the big cities, Rome, Milan, and the north in general are seen, as the center where everything happens. So yes, this is very much, the north-south divide is very much the, still a hot topic in Italian politics nowadays.
Mm. The other area where I think your work has some kind of contemporary resonance a little bit is in the question of migration and the transformation, the effects that migration has on the kind of original home country as well. So in your case, on Italy, you're more focused in a dissertation on what's happening in the Italian countryside than you are on what's happening in the United States itself. And I think there must be a connection there. I mean, obviously this isn't what the work is about, but there's a connection there with what the effects that migration has on countries today, like countries in Africa, that send more people as migrants than kind of return to them. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you're going to develop this project? Because you're going on to do your master's, MSc in European history at Oxford in September. Is that right?
I am.
Tell us about what you're going to be doing, how you're going to expand this project when you get there.
So yes, in my undergraduate dissertation here at Birmingham, I touched upon the theme of gendered mobility. Especially how people associate mobility, both spatial and ideological or socio-economic, with the male universe. Whilst the idea of immobility, of stillness, is associated to the female universe. So in my master's dissertation, I would like to look in more detail at this, and especially at you mentioned them before, the so-called women who remained behind in Italian temporary male migration, and especially how these women, despite staying in their villages, cities, they experienced maybe emancipation as a consequence of the dynamics of migration. I'm particularly interested in understanding how, with the male head of the household being temporarily abroad, how the family administration changed, and what sort of long-term consequences this had on Italian society in the 20th century. So I want to be to continue looking at migration to the United States, but I would also like to explore migration to Europe, especially under guest worker programs in the 1950s and 60s and so on. There's also, it's also true that South Italy still plays a very important role in international migration, both voluntary and forced nowadays. I think this really connects my research to the present in a way.
It's not directly connected to this question of the present, but I thought we might say a little bit about sources. There's a particular set of sources, photographic sources that you use that I enjoyed, where it kind of illustrates the problems of gender and tradition and so on in a society that's experiencing this disruption of migration. So you've got these kind of family photographs with the chair in the middle that the male head of household is supposed to be sitting in. The chair represents the male head of household. And in some of them, you've got a tiny child, basically, like whatever the oldest boy is in the class, he sits in the chair. He is the patriarch of the family. And in others, I think, what have you just got a hat or something like that?
Yeah.
Like really bringing home the absence of the patriarch. But of course, your research suggests actually that the female, the mother, the lead of the house, it becomes the real head of the household and does almost all of the things that the male head of household would have otherwise done.
Yes, absolutely. Although her role as matriarch in a way is not recognized, the woman in this period, in absence of her husband and also older sons who would also migrate, she takes on many responsibilities that would traditionally be considered male responsibilities, like going to the post office, working the land, and also raising children in a way. Obviously women do raise children normally, but in this case they also need to impose rules, and they represent the only figure that their children can look up to. So it's
and I guess you've got letters going back and forth between husbands and wives, for example, where the husbands are trying to tell the wife, this is what you've got to do. This is how you've really got to look after my father while he's there, this kind of thing,
right? Yes, absolutely. There is these letters. In these letters, we see proper quarrels between husbands and wives relating to the administration of the household and the family, and you see a sort of tension between the traditional patriarchal society and the husband who seeks to keep order even though he's far from the household, and then the initiative of women who want to maybe even become more involved with the economic and political life of their villages and provinces. So there are frequent arguments. Obviously, the conditions of sending transoceanic letters amplified this arguments. Response cannot come before months passed. So it's quite interesting to look at migrant letters. I think they are an exceptional kind of primary source. We can really see on the one side, the sacrifice that a family would have to make in order to allow male migration, and on the other side there's also much hope. There's also a spirit of initiative, and
I mean, it's interesting how actually it's the letters crossing the Atlantic and the length of time it takes for that to happen. That's one of the closest connections between your period and mine. In both cases it takes weeks for the communication to actually happen. And what you're talking about with women left at home gradually taking more and more command of the household reminds me of a case in my period about Abigail Adams. So her husband, John Adams, before he was president, he was ambassador to London and Paris before that, part of the peace negotiations. And while Abigail Adams, his wife, was at home, she did all sorts of things. Obviously, she ran the farm, but she also sort of took over his kind of investment portfolio and started investing in various kind of speculative stocks and bonds and stuff that he explicitly told her not to do. She started kind of investing and doing deals, and she was much smarter than him in terms of thinking about economic matters in the end. Woody Holton writes about this in his biography of Abigail Adams, and I think obviously again this is a kind of relatively small elite class that cares about investments, but it's an example of the same dynamic taking place where women, when their husband is away, suddenly can become free to do the things that they might have done in a more emancipated world.
Yes, although their emancipation is not formally or legally recognized.
Right, and that puts all sorts of limits on their activities.
Yes.